The hurricane had been building for 3 days, churning through the Gulf of Mexico like a living thing made of wind and fury. By the time it reached the Florida Panhandle, it was a Category 4 monster with sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. The evacuation orders had gone out 48 hours earlier, and most people had listened. Most, but not all. Lieutenant Commander David Chen stood on the porch of his small beach house in Destin, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. The wind was already picking up, bending the palm trees at unnatural angles, sending debris skittering across the sand. He should have evacuated. His commanding officer had ordered him to. His ex-wife had called 3 times from Virginia, begging him to leave. But David had spent the last 15 years of his life running toward danger, not away from it. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, countless classified operations he'd never be able to talk about. He'd faced down enemy fire, survived IED blasts, jumped out of perfectly good aircraft at 30,000 feet. He wasn't afraid of a storm. Beside him, Ranger whined, a low, anxious sound that made David look down at his partner. The German Shepherd was 7 years old, 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence, with the kind of training that cost the military hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ranger had been with David for 5 years, had deployed with him twice, had saved his life and the lives of his teammates more times than David could count. And right now, Ranger was telling him they needed to leave. "I know, boy," David said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "But where would we go? Roads are gridlocked. Shelters are full. We're better off riding it out here. The house is built to code, it'll hold." Ranger's ears flattened, and he pressed against David's leg. The signal for distress, for danger, for something's wrong. David had learned over 5 years to trust Ranger's instincts. The dog had alerted to ambushes before humans could see them, had detected IEDs that electronic sweepers missed, had sensed danger in ways that defied rational explanation. Military working dogs weren't just trained, they were intuitive, reading environments and threats through senses humans couldn't access. If Ranger said something was wrong, something was wrong. "Okay," David conceded. "We'll secure everything we can, then move to the bathroom. Interior room, no windows, we'll be safe there." He spent the next hour boarding up windows, bringing in outdoor furniture, filling bathtubs and containers with water. The power had already gone out, leaving the house lit only by battery-powered lanterns. Outside, the wind was screaming now, a continuous howl that sounded almost alive. By the time David and Ranger retreated to the master bathroom, the hurricane was directly overhead. The house shook with each gust, and David could hear things slamming against the exterior walls, tree branches, roof tiles, parts of neighbors' houses. He sat in the bathtub with Ranger pressed against his side, both of them wearing protective vests, David's tactical vest from his deployment days, Ranger's K9 harness. The storm raged for hours. David lost track of time in the darkness, measuring the passage only by the changing pitch of the wind, the varying intensity of the impacts against the house. He thought about his daughter, safely in Virginia with her mother. He thought about his team, scattered across the country on leave. He thought about his father, a Marine who'd taught David that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Around midnight, something changed. The wind dropped slightly, the barrage against the house eased, and in the relative quiet, David heard something that made his blood run cold. Ranger heard it too. The dog's head lifted, ears perked forward, every muscle in his body going tense. It was a sound barely audible over the wind, a voice, high and desperate, calling for help. David climbed out of the tub, moving to the bathroom door. "Did you hear that?" Ranger whined, pawing at the door. That could be someone in trouble. The dog barked once, sharply, his alert bark, the one that meant pay attention. David made a decision. He grabbed his tactical flashlight, checked that Ranger's harness was secure, and opened the bathroom door. The interior of the house was chaos, water leaking through the ceiling, furniture overturned, windows cracked but not broken, but the structure had held. He moved to the back door, Ranger at his heel, and opened it carefully. The wind nearly tore it from his hands, and rain lashed into his face with the force of a pressure washer. The world outside was a nightmare of darkness and noise, but through it, David heard the voice again. "Help, please, someone help me." It was coming from the woods behind his property, a stretch of pine forest that bordered the beach community. In Goodwee. Other, it was a pleasant walking trail. In a hurricane, it was a death trap of falling trees and flying debris. Ranger search. The command was instinctive, born from years of training and deployment. Ranger bolted into the storm, his nose to the ground, tracking the scent of distress with single-minded focus. David followed, his flashlight cutting through the rain, his body bent against the wind. The forest was devastated. Trees were down everywhere, and the ground was a maze of broken branches and standing water. David's flashlight beam swept back and forth, searching for movement, for any sign of the person calling for help. Ranger stopped suddenly, his body rigid, his attention locked on something David couldn't see. The dog barked urgently, then moved forward, disappearing behind a massive fallen oak. David followed, climbing over the trunk, and stopped dead. A woman was pinned beneath a smaller tree, maybe 25 years old, soaked to the bone, her face twisted with pain and terror. But that wasn't what made David's blood run cold. Her hands were bound behind her back with zip ties. Her mouth was gagged with duct tape. And even in the rain and darkness, David could see the bruises on her face, the cuts on her arms, the terror in her eyes. This wasn't a hurricane victim. This was a crime victim. David dropped to his knees beside her, his training taking over. "I'm Lieutenant Commander David Chen, United States Navy. You're safe now. I'm going to help you." He pulled the duct tape gently from her mouth, and she gasped, sobbing. "He's coming back. He said he was coming back for me." Who did this?" "I don't know his name. He took me 3 days ago, I think. I was at a gas station and he grabbed me, put something over my face, and when I woke up, Her voice broke into sobs. David's mind was racing. 3 days ago, before the evacuation orders. This woman had been kidnapped, held somewhere, and in the chaos of the hurricane, her captor had either lost her or abandoned her. Or was coming back for her. "Okay, listen to me. My name is David. This is Ranger. We're going to get you out of here. Where were you being held?" "A house not far from here, maybe half a mile into the woods. Old, falling apart. He kept me in the basement." David used his knife to cut the zip ties, freeing her hands. She cried out as circulation returned, and he quickly assessed her injuries. Cuts and bruises, signs of physical abuse, possible dehydration, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though David could see she was barely holding it together. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. "We need to get you to safety. My house is closest, maybe 200 yards that way. Can you make it?" "I think so." They started moving, David supporting the woman, Ranger ranging ahead to scout for obstacles. The storm was intensifying again. They must have been in the eye wall, with the worst yet to come. Every step was a battle against wind and rain. They'd made it maybe 50 yards when Ranger stopped abruptly. The dog's body went rigid, his hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. David knew that posture. Ranger had detected a threat. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping toward them. And then David heard a voice, male, angry, shouting over the wind. "Sarah, Sarah, where are you?" The woman, Sarah, froze, her entire body shaking. "That's him. Oh God, that's him." David's combat instincts kicked in instantly. He pulled Sarah behind a fallen tree, positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. "Ranger, guard." The German shepherd moved immediately, placing himself as a barrier, his attention locked on the flashlight beam. The beam got closer, and then David saw him, a man in his 40s, heavyset, wearing rain gear and carrying something that looked like a crowbar. His face was twisted with rage. "Sarah, I know you're out here. You can't hide from me." David stepped out from behind the tree, his flashlight illuminating the man's face. "That's far enough. Stay where you are." The man squinted into the light, his expression shifting from rage to surprise to calculation. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the person who found the woman you kidnapped and assaulted, and I'm the person who's about to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The man's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't know what you're talking about. That's my girlfriend. We had a fight and she ran off. I'm just trying to find her before the storm kills her." "Your girlfriend is zip-tied and gagged." "She's confused, hysterical. I was trying to keep her safe." "Stop lying." David's voice was cold, controlled. "I'm a Navy SEAL. I've been trained to recognize victims and predators, and you're a predator." The man's expression hardened. "You think you're a hero? You think you can just take her from me?" He raised the CR. "Obar, I don't care who you are, she's mine." "Ranger, watch him." The German shepherd moved forward, positioning himself between David and the threat, his body coiled and ready. The man took a step back, reassessing. "Call off your dog." "Not going to happen. Here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to drop that crowbar, get on your knees, and wait for the police. The alternative is that my dog takes you down, and trust me, you don't want that." The man looked at Ranger, at David, calculating his odds. Then, suddenly, he lunged forward, the crowbar swinging toward David's head. What happened next took maybe 3 seconds. Ranger launched himself at the attacker, 70 pounds of trained aggression hitting the man in the chest and driving him backward. The crowbar went flying. The man screamed, trying to fight off the dog, but Ranger had him pinned, teeth locked on the man's forearm, holding him down. "Ranger, hold," David commanded, and the dog adjusted his grip, painful enough to keep the man subdued, but controlled enough not to cause serious injury. David zip-tied the man's hands behind his back, using the same ties that had been on Sarah. The symmetry felt appropriate. "Sarah, can you walk? We need to get back to my house and call the police." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and together they made their way through the storm, Ranger keeping pace beside them, his attention split between guiding them and guarding their prisoner. By the time they reached David's house, the hurricane was hitting full force again. David got everyone inside, secured the attacker in the bathroom, hands tied, door locked, and brought Sarah to the living room where she could warm up and rest. He tried his cell phone, but there was no signal. The landline was dead. They were completely cut off. "We'll have to wait until the storm passes," David said. "Then I'll get you to authorities." Sarah nodded, wrapping herself in the blanket David had given her. Ranger lay at her feet, his presence clearly comforting her. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't found me, if your dog hadn't found me." "But we did, and you're safe now." David paused. "Can you tell me what happened? Who is that man?" Sarah took a shaky breath and began to tell her story. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she was a social worker from Pensacola. 3 days ago, she'd been driving to evacuate ahead of the hurricane when she stopped at a gas station. The man, she'd later learned his name was Richard Voss, had approached her, asking for directions. Before she could react, he'd sprayed something in her face, and everything went black. When she woke up, she was in a basement, old, moldy, with boarded-up windows and a single light bulb. Richard had told her she was his now, that he'd been watching her for weeks, that the hurricane was perfect because no one would be looking for her. He'd kept her there for 3 days. He'd hurt her. Sarah didn't go into details, but David could see the trauma in her eyes. And then, as the hurricane approached, Richard had panicked. He needed to move her somewhere safer, somewhere deeper in the woods. He'd been dragging her through the forest when the tree fell, pinning her legs. In the chaos, he'd run back to get tools, leaving her there. That's when she'd started screaming for help. That's when Ranger had found her. "I thought I was going to die," Sarah said quietly. "I thought either the storm would kill me or he would come back and kill me. I prayed someone would hear me, but I didn't really believe," her voice broke. "And then your dog was there. And then you were there. And you saved me." David felt the weight of what she was saying, the responsibility of being the right person in the right place at the right time. Ranger saved you. I just followed him. You both saved me. Sarah looked down at Ranger, who was resting his head on her knee. Is he always this gentle? I thought military dogs were aggressive. Ranger knows the difference between protecting and attacking. He understands when someone needs help versus when someone needs to be stopped. David scratched behind the dog's ears. He's the best partner I've ever had. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. The house creaked and groaned, but it held. David checked on their prisoner periodically. Richard was awake, glaring hatefully through the bathroom door's gap, but secure. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah spoke again. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you stay? Everyone evacuated. You could have left, been safe. Why risk your life to stay here? David considered the question. Honestly, I don't have a good answer. Stubbornness, maybe, or habit. I've spent so much of my life in dangerous places that it feels normal now. My ex-wife says I have a self-destructive streak. Your ex-wife? Divorced 2 years ago. She's a doctor, lives in Virginia with our daughter. The military life was too much for her, the deployments, the danger, never knowing if I'd come home. She gave me an ultimatum, the teams or my family. I chose the teams. David's voice was heavy with regret. Worst decision I ever made. Do you still love her? The question was direct, almost inappropriate given they'd just met. But there was something about Sarah, maybe the trauma they'd shared, maybe the intimacy of the situation, that made the usual social barriers feel irrelevant. I never stopped loving her. I just couldn't be the person she needed me to be. David looked at Ranger. That's why I got Ranger. After the divorce, after my last deployment, I was struggling. PTSD, depression, the usual invisible wounds. The Navy assigned me Ranger as part of a working dog team, and he gave me purpose again. A reason to get up, to train, to keep going. He's more than just a working dog to you. He's my best friend, my therapist, my reason for staying alive on the days when I wasn't sure I wanted to. David's voice was raw with honesty. People don't understand what these dogs do for us. They don't just detect bombs or track enemies. They keep us human. They remind us what loyalty looks like, what unconditional love looks like. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I work with trauma victims, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. I've seen what happens when people lose hope, when they stop believing anyone cares about them. And I've seen what happens when someone shows up, just one person who says, I see you, you matter, I'm going to help. It changes everything. Is that why you became a social worker? My sister was killed by her boyfriend when I was 16, beat her to death in their apartment while neighbors heard and did nothing. By the time someone finally called the police, it was too late. Sarah's voice was steady, but David could hear the old pain underneath. I couldn't save her, but I can save others. That's what I do. I show up for people who need help, people who think no one's coming. And tonight, someone showed up for you. Yeah, Sarah's voice broke slightly. Someone did. The storm continued through the night, but as dawn approached, the wind began to ease. By the time pale gray light filtered through the boarded windows, the hurricane had moved on, leaving destruction in its wake but sparing David's house. David's cell phone still had no signal, but he found an old battery-powered radio and managed to pick up an emergency broadcast. The storm had devastated the coast, flooding, structural damage, power outages affecting hundreds of thousands. Emergency services were overwhelmed. It would be hours, maybe days, before help reached them. We need to get you to a hospital, David said to Sarah, and we need to get him to the police. How? You said the roads are impassable. They are, for cars. David pulled out a topographic map of the area. But there's a National Guard staging area about 5 miles north, on higher ground. If we can get there on foot, they'll have medical support and communications. 5 miles, with him. Sarah gestured toward the bathroom where Richard was imprisoned. I'll carry him if I have to, but he's coming with us. I'm not letting him go, and I'm not leaving him here to potentially escape. Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. Okay, let's do it. They prepared quickly. David packed a go bag with water, first aid supplies, his sidearm, and emergency rations. He freed Richard from the bathroom, keeping him zip-tied and under close watch. Ranger stayed between Richard and Sarah, making it clear that any aggressive move would be met with immediate consequences. The walk through the devastated landscape was surreal. Trees were down everywhere, houses were damaged or destroyed, and debris littered the streets. They saw no one else, everyone had either evacuated or was sheltering in place. The world felt empty, post-apocalyptic. Richard tried to talk several times, alternating between threats and pleading. You're making a mistake. She's lying about everything. I'm the victim here. Save it for the police, David cut him off. You're not talking your way out of this. They'd been walking for about 2 hours when Ranger suddenly alerted, his body going rigid, his attention locked on something ahead. David's hand went to his sidearm. What is it, boy? Ranger moved forward cautiously, and David followed, Sarah staying close behind. They rounded a bend in the road and stopped. A woman and 2 children were trapped on the second floor of a partially collapsed house, waving frantically for help. The structure looked unstable, ready to collapse completely with any wrong move. Please, the woman shouted, help us, the stairs collapsed and we can't get down. David assessed the situation quickly. The house was dangerous, but the family was in immediate danger. He looked at Sarah, at Richard, at the trapped family, making split-second calculations. Sarah, can you watch him? He gestured to Richard. I don't know how. Ranger will help, Ranger, guard. The dog immediately moved to position himself between Richard and any potential escape route. If he moves, Ranger will stop him, and if you need to, use this. David handed Sarah a canister of pepper spray from his go bag. Aim for the face, spray, then run. What are you going to do? Get them down. David approached the house, assessing the structure. The second floor was maybe 15 feet up, and the interior stairs had collapsed. But there was a tree nearby, damaged but still standing, that he might be able to use. He called up to the woman. Ma'am, I'm going to climb up to you. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Yes, please, my children. I'll get them down. Stay calm. David climbed the tree, using branches as handholds, then moved carefully onto what remained of the house's roof. The structure groaned under his weight, threatening to collapse. He moved quickly, reaching the second-floor window where the family waited. Kids first, you trust me. The older child, maybe 10, nodded. David lifted the boy through the window, carried him carefully across the unstable roof to the tree, then guided him down. The process took several minutes, and every second felt like the house might collapse. He repeated it with the younger child, then finally with the mother. By the time they were all safely on the ground, David was sweating despite the cool morning air, and his hands were shaking with adrenaline. The mother was sobbing with relief. Thank you, oh God, thank you. You're welcome, but we need to keep moving. There's a National Guard staging area 5 miles north. You can get help there. The family joined their small group, and they continued north. Now they were 7 people, 1 dog and 1 prisoner, all trudging through a disaster zone. Richard tried to use the confusion to escape. He suddenly bolted, running toward a side street, his hands still tied behind his back. Ranger was faster. The dog sprinted after him, covering the distance in seconds, and took him down with a perfectly executed takedown, hitting Richard's legs and driving him face-first into the mud. David jogged over, pulled Richard to his feet, and looked him in the eyes. Try that again, and I'll let Ranger be less gentle. Understand? Richard, muddy and furious and defeated, nodded. They finally reached the National Guard staging area around noon. The guardsmen met them with medical supplies, food, water, and communications equipment. Sarah was treated for her injuries. The mother and her children were given shelter. and Richard Voss was taken into custody by military police who'd been coordinating with civilian law enforcement. A captain approached David, looking impressed. "Commander Chen, I understand you rescued a kidnapping victim during the hurricane, apprehended her attacker, and saved a family from a collapsed building." "My dog did most of the work." The captain smiled. "Your dog's going to need a medal then. We've been trying to get into that area for hours, but the roads were impassable, if you hadn't been there." "But I was there, that's what matters." The captain nodded. "We're evacuating everyone to the main shelter in Pensacola. Medical personnel are there, along with FBI agents who want to interview the victim and take your statement." "What about my house?" "Standing, from what we can see on aerial surveillance. You're one of the lucky ones." "Lucky?" David looked at Sarah, who was being treated by a medic but kept glancing over at him and Ranger with gratitude in her eyes. He looked at the mother and her children, safe because he'd been there to help. He looked at Ranger, lying contentedly at his feet, tail wagging. Maybe luck had nothing to do with it. Maybe this was what he was meant to do, be in the right place at the right time, with the right skills and the right partner, to help people who needed help. Maybe that was his purpose. The shelter in Pensacola was chaos. Hundreds of evacuees, overwhelmed staff, the constant noise of people trying to find loved ones and assess damage. David found a quiet corner with Ranger and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. An FBI agent found him an hour later, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Commander Chen? Special Agent Rebecca Torres, I need to get your statement about the Richard Voss situation." David spent the next 2 hours walking Agent Torres through everything, finding Sarah, confronting Richard, securing him during and after the storm. Torres took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You understand this is going to be a major case," Torres said when they'd finished. "Richard Voss has been on radar for months. We've had suspicions about other missing women in the region, but no evidence, no witnesses. Sarah Mitchell may be the break we've been waiting for." Other missing women. 4 over the past 2 years, all similar profiles, single in their 20s, social service workers or healthcare professionals, all disappeared without a trace. Tor's expression was grim. "We think Richard's been doing this for a while. You may have saved not just Sarah's life, but the lives of his future victims." The weight of that settled over David like a heavy blanket. One random decision, to stay during the hurricane, to go outside when he heard a voice, and he'd potentially stopped a serial predator. "Where is he now?" David asked. "In federal custody. He's being charged with kidnapping, assault, attempted murder, and we're investigating the other disappearances. With Sarah's testimony and the evidence you helped preserve, he's going away for a long time." "Good." Torres studied David for a moment. "You know, the Bureau is always looking for people with your skills. Former special operations, trained in high-stress situations, good at reading people. Ever thought about a career in law enforcement after the Navy?" David almost laughed. "I'm not exactly a team player, ask my ex-wife." "From what I've heard, you're an excellent team player. You just need the right team." Torres handed him her card. "Think about it. We could use someone like you." After Torres left, David found Sarah. She was sitting with a victim advocate, looking exhausted but composed. When she saw David and Ranger approaching, her face lit up. "How are you holding it together?" David asked, sitting beside her. "Honestly, I'm not, but I'm good at pretending." Sarah's smile was fragile. "The advocate says I'll need therapy, probably for years. PTSD, trust issues, the whole package. But I'm alive to have those problems, and that's because of you and Ranger." Ranger's tail wagged at his name, and he moved closer to Sarah, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur, tears sliding down her face. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You risked your life for a stranger. You didn't have to, but you did. Why?" David thought about the question, really thought about it. Because I could. Because Ranger found you and told me you needed help. Because I've spent my whole career learning how to save people, and what's the point of having those skills if you don't use them when someone needs saving? That's not a small thing, that's everything. Sarah wiped her eyes. I help people for a living, but I've never had someone help me like this. I didn't know people like you existed, people who actually follow through, who don't just walk away. I think there are more people like that than you realize. They just need the opportunity to show it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Ranger interact with some children who'd approached cautiously. The dog was gentle with them, letting them pet him, wagging his tail, offering the kind of uncomplicated affection that only dogs can give. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "For you, I mean." "I go back to my house, assess the damage, figure out what needs to be repaired, then back to base when I'm called up for duty." David paused. "What about you?" "I don't know. My apartment was in the evacuation zone, probably damaged. My car's still at that gas station, assuming it wasn't destroyed. I don't even know where to start putting my life back together." You start with one step at a time. That's how you survive anything. You focus on the next step, then the one after that, until one day you look back and realize you've come a long way. Sarah looked at him with something like wonder. "You've been through this before, the aftermath, the trauma. Different circumstances, but yeah, combat trauma, divorce trauma, the kind of wounds that don't show up on x-rays." David's voice was quiet. "I'm not going to lie to you, it's hard. Some days you won't want to get out of bed. Some nights you won't be able to sleep, but you'll survive it, and eventually you'll learn to live with it." "Did you learn to live with it?" "I'm still learning, but I have help." He gestured to Ranger. "He makes it easier." Sarah nodded slowly. "I should get a dog." "You should, but give yourself time to heal first. You've been through hell, don't rush the recovery." A voice called Sarah's name, a woman in her 50s with red eyes and a desperate expression. Sarah stood up quickly, her face transforming. "Mom." The two women embraced, both sobbing, and David felt his throat tight. He'd helped reunite a family. He'd given a mother her daughter back. That meant something. David and Ranger left the shelter, walking through the damaged streets toward where he'd parked his truck. They passed destroyed buildings, fallen trees, people sifting through rubble. Looking for salvageable belongings, the hurricane had taken so much from this community. But it hadn't taken everything. People were already starting to rebuild, to help each other, to show the resilience that comes from shared suffering. His phone buzzed, finally, a signal. Messages flooded in. His commanding officer checking on him, his ex-wife Jennifer frantic that he hadn't responded, his daughter Emma asking if he was okay. He called Emma first. "Dad," his 12-year-old daughter's voice was thick with tears. "Are you okay? Mom said you stayed during the hurricane and we couldn't reach you and I thought." "I'm fine, sweetheart. The house is okay, I'm okay, Ranger's okay. Everything's fine." "You shouldn't have stayed. That was stupid." "You're probably right. Mom's really mad at you." "I know." "Are you coming to visit soon? I miss you, Ranger too." David felt his chest constrict. "I miss you too, baby. I'll try to come up next month, okay? We can go to that pizza place you like." "Promise." "Promise." After he hung up, he stood for a moment, looking at his phone, at his daughter's smiling face in the contact photo. This was what he'd sacrificed. Time with her, normalcy, the chance to be a regular dad, because he couldn't walk away from the mission, from the team, from the need to serve. Was it worth it? He looked at Ranger, thought about Sarah safe because they'd been there, thought about the mother and her children rescued from a collapsing house. Thought about Richard Voss in federal custody, unable to hurt anyone else. Maybe the question wasn't whether it was worth it. Maybe the question was whether he could live with himself if he'd made different choices. His phone rang. Jennifer. He answered, "Hey." "You're alive." Her voice was angry and relieved in equal measure. "I've been calling for 24 hours. Emma was terrified. I was terrified. You promised me you'd evacuate David. I know, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's it. You risk your life for no reason, and all I get is sorry. It wasn't for no reason. David's voice was quiet. I found a woman who'd been kidnapped. She was trapped in the woods during the storm. If I hadn't been here, if I'd evacuated like you wanted, she'd be dead. Silence on the other end. Then, what? David explained, keeping it brief. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You saved her life, Jennifer said finally. Ranger saved her life, I just followed him. No, you made the choice to help. You didn't have to. You could have left her, focused on getting yourself to safety. But you didn't. Her voice softened. That's who you are, David. That's what I fell in love with, your need to help people, to be the hero, to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. It's also why you divorced me. Yeah, Jennifer sighed. It is. Because that same quality that makes you a hero makes you a terrible husband and an absent father. You can't balance both. You've tried, and you can't. And Emma and I, we need someone who's present, who's safe, who comes home every night. I know. But I'm glad you were there for that woman. I'm glad you saved her. Jennifer paused. Just don't die, okay? Emma needs her father, even if he's only around part-time. I'll try not to die. That's not good enough, but I guess it's all you can give me. She hung up. David stood there for a moment, processing the conversation, feeling the familiar ache of loving someone you've lost. Then Ranger nudged his hand, and David looked down at his partner. Come on, boy, let's go see what's left of home. His house had survived remarkably well, some roof damage, water intrusion, but structurally sound. They spent the next few days cleaning up, making temporary repairs, helping neighbors who'd been hit worse. And through it all, David thought about Agent Tor's offer, about whether there was a life for him beyond the Navy, beyond deployments, beyond the constant cycle of danger and distance. 2 weeks after the hurricane, Sarah called him. David, it's Sarah Mitchell. I got your number from the FBI. I hope that's okay. Of course, how are you doing? Better, I'm staying with my parents while I look for a new place. I've started therapy and it's hard but helpful. She paused. I wanted to thank you again and to tell you something. What's that? I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you survived trauma, about taking it one step at a time, and I realized something. I spent my whole career helping other people, but I never learned how to accept help myself. I never learned how to be vulnerable, to admit I couldn't do it alone. That's a hard lesson. Yeah, it is, but you taught it to me. By showing up, by helping, by not walking away, you showed me what it looks like when someone actually follows through. And I want to be that person for others. I want to, her voice caught. I want to make sure your sacrifice mattered. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was just being human. Maybe, but it changed my life. Sarah took a breath. I'm starting a nonprofit, a victim advocacy organization specifically for people who have been through what I went through, kidnapping, assault, trauma. And I'm going to make sure they get the help they need, the support I got from you and from the professionals who stepped up. David felt something warm bloom in his chest. That's incredible, Sarah. I'm calling it Ranger's Hope, after your dog, the one who found me in the storm. Is that okay? David looked at Ranger, who was sprawled on the floor chewing a toy, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd inspired hope in a stranger. Yeah, David said, his voice rough with emotion. That's more than okay. 6 months after the hurricane, David stood in a conference room at FBI headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. Around the table sat Special Agent Rebecca Torres, her supervisor, and 2 other agents from the Bureau's Human Trafficking Task Force. Torres had called him 3 weeks ago with an offer. A position as a special consultant to the FBI, focusing on rescue operations and victim recovery. The job would use his military skills, but in a domestic setting, helping save people from trafficking, kidnapping, and abuse situations. It would mean leaving the Navy, leaving his team, leaving the only career he'd known for 15 years. But it would also mean being closer to Emma. Being able to visit regularly, to be present in his daughter's life in ways he'd never been able to before. The position is unique, Torres was explaining. You'd work with our field teams on high-risk rescue operations, but you'd also train agents in tactical scenarios, help develop protocols for extracting victims from dangerous situations. And Ranger would come with you. Military working dogs are valuable assets in this work. What's the timeline? David asked. We'd want you to start within 3 months. Training period, background clearance. Even though you already have top-secret clearance from the Navy, we have our own process. Then you'd be assigned to our regional office in Virginia. Virginia, where Emma and Jennifer lived. Torres seemed to read his thoughts. I know this is a big decision. You've built your whole life around the Navy, around the teams, but I'm not asking you to stop being a warrior. I'm asking you to redirect that warrior spirit toward a different mission. David looked at Ranger, who was lying under the table, patient as always. The dog had been with him through so much: deployments, divorce, the hurricane, the rescue of Sarah Mitchell. Ranger had saved lives and asked for nothing in return except food, exercise, and the chance to work. What did Ranger want? If dogs could choose their path, what would his partner pick? As if reading David's thoughts, Ranger stood up and moved to the door, then looked back at David expectantly. The message was clear. Let's go. There's work to do. Can I have a week to think about it? David asked. Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly. David and Ranger left the FBI building and drove to Jennifer's house. A comfortable colonial in a quiet neighborhood, with a yard where Emma could play, and a stability that David had never been able to provide. Emma was waiting on the porch, and when she saw them pull up, she sprinted down the driveway. Ranger. The dog bounded out of the truck, tail wagging furiously, and Emma threw her arms around him. At 12, she was getting too old for such unbridled displays of affection with humans, but with Ranger, she was still a little girl who loved her dog. David watched them together, feeling his heart squeeze. Emma had grown up with Ranger. The dog had been there for her when David couldn't be, at birthdays, school events, ordinary Tuesday nights. Ranger had been more present than David ever was. Jennifer came outside, looking cautious but not hostile. David, how was the meeting? Complicated, can we talk? They sat on the porch while Emma played with Ranger in the yard, throwing a tennis ball that the dog retrieved with tireless enthusiasm. David explained the FBI's offer, the opportunity, the implications. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You want to know what I think, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Yeah. I think you should take it. David blinked, surprised. Really? Really? Look, David, I know why we got divorced. You chose the mission over your family every single time. And I couldn't compete with that, couldn't compete with the adrenaline, the brotherhood, the feeling of being essential. But this, Jennifer gestured to Emma and Ranger. This gives you a chance to be both, to do the work you're called to do, but also to be present for your daughter. To actually show up for the parent-teacher conferences, and the soccer games, and the birthday parties. I don't know if I can do both. I've never been able to before. Because you were deployed half the year in dangerous places, unreachable. This is different. This is a 9-to-5 job, well, sort of, with a commute and weekends off and the ability to be there when Emma needs you. Jennifer's voice softened. She needs you, David. She loves you and misses you, and she's getting to the age where she's going to need her father to guide her through everything coming her way. David watched Emma playing with Ranger, her laughter carrying across the yard. He thought about all the moments he'd missed, her first day of kindergarten, her school plays, her first soccer goal. He'd been overseas, protecting strangers, while his own daughter grew up without him. What if I fail? David asked quietly. What if I take this job and I'm still not good at being present? What if I mess up again? Then you try again. That's what parents do. Jennifer smiled slightly. And you won't be alone, you'll have Ranger to keep you accountable. That dog is better at commitment than most humans. They called Emma over, and David explained the situation in terms she could understand. I might be taking a new job. It would mean I'd live closer to you, see you more often. But it also means leaving the Navy, leaving my team. What do you think? Emma looked at him seriously, then at Ranger, then back at him. Would Ranger come too? Of course, wherever I go, he goes. Then I think you should do it. I want you closer, Dad. I know your job is important, but I miss you. A lot. And Ranger misses you too when you're gone. David pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling her arms wrap around him, feeling the weight of 12 years of absence pressing down on him. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll do it. 3 months later, David walked into the FBI's Virginia field office for his first day of work. He wore a suit instead of fatigues, carried a badge instead of a rifle, and felt completely out of place. But Ranger was at his side, wearing his FBI K-9 vest, and that made everything feel a little more normal. Tours met them in the lobby. Welcome aboard, Agent Chen, ready to get started. As ready as I'll ever be. The work was different but similar. Instead of hunting terrorists in foreign countries, David was hunting predators on American soil. Instead of kicking down doors in hostile villages, he was executing warrants on stash houses and trafficking operations. The skills translated, but the context was jarring. And the victories felt more personal. His third week on the job, David's team rescued 6 women from a trafficking ring operating out of a warehouse in Baltimore. The women were terrified, traumatized, barely able to speak. David knelt beside them, Ranger at his side, and spoke in the same gentle tone he'd used with Sarah Mitchell in the storm. You're safe now, we're going to help you, you're going to be okay. One of the women, Eastern European, maybe 20 years old, reached out tentatively to touch Ranger's head. The dog leaned into her hand, offering comfort, and she began to cry. That night, David called Sarah Mitchell. How's the nonprofit going? He asked. Amazing. We've helped 43 victims in the last 6 months, connected them with legal services, therapy, safe housing. Your donation helped us hire 2 full-time advocates. Sarah paused. How's the FBI treating you? It's good, different but good. We rescued 6 women today from a trafficking ring. That's incredible, David. You're making a real difference. We all are, you, me, the advocates, the agents. It's not one person, it's a system of people who decided to show up. David looked at Ranger, who was sprawled on his apartment floor, tired but content. Ranger's the real hero, though. He's got a talent for making victims feel safe. He learned from you. Maybe, or maybe I learned from him. David settled into his new life slowly. He saw Emma every weekend, attended her soccer games, helped with her homework, took her and Ranger to the park. He had Sunday dinners with Jennifer and her new boyfriend, awkward at first, but eventually comfortable. He built a routine that didn't involve deployments or danger zones. But he didn't forget the mission. Couldn't forget it, really, because every case reminded him of Sarah, of how close she'd come to disappearing forever, of how many others weren't as lucky. 1 year after the hurricane, David received an invitation to speak at Rangers Hope's first annual fundraiser. Sarah was being honored for her work, and she wanted David to speak about the rescue that had started everything. He almost said no. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and talking about that night still brought up complicated emotions. But Sarah had asked, and he owed her that much. The fundraise was held at a hotel in Pensacola, with 200 people in attendance: donors, victims' advocates, survivors, law enforcement officers. David stood backstage, Ranger at his side, feeling his palms sweat. Tours was there too, along with several other FBI agents who'd worked trafficking cases. She caught David's eye and gave him a reassuring nod. Sarah took the stage first, telling her story with the kind of raw honesty that made the room go silent. She described the kidnapping, the captivity, the terror of being trapped under a tree in a hurricane. And then she described hearing Ranger barking, seeing David's flashlight, realizing that someone had come. "I'd given up hope," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was going to die in those woods, forgotten and alone. But then David and Ranger found me. They risked their lives to save mine, and they didn't just save me that night, they saved my future. They gave me a reason to keep fighting, to keep living, to help others the way they helped me." She called David to the stage, and he walked out, Ranger padding beside him, to thunderous applause. David approached the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and felt his prepared speech evaporate from his mind. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "A year ago, I was a Navy SEAL who'd lost his way. I was divorced, distant from my daughter, going through the motions of life without really living it. And then a hurricane hit, and I made a decision to stay when everyone else left. That decision changed everything." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Ranger, my dog, my partner, my best friend, he found Sarah in those woods. I just followed him. And in doing so, I found something I'd been missing: purpose. The reminder that we're here to help each other, to show up when someone needs us, to be the person who doesn't walk away." David looked at Sarah, who was crying openly in the front row. "Sarah asked me once why I helped her. I said it was because I could, but the truth is more complicated than that. I helped because that's what we're supposed to do as humans. We're supposed to see suffering and respond. We're supposed to use our skills and resources and opportunities to make things better. And when we do that, when we show up for each other, we create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see." He gestured to the room full of people. "Everyone here is a ripple from that night in the storm. Sarah created Ranger's Hope, which has helped dozens of victims. Those victims have healed and gone on to help others. The FBI's trafficking task force has rescued more people because of the publicity this case brought. And I found a new mission, a new way to serve, a new chance to be present for my daughter." David's voice grew stronger. "So if you take nothing else from tonight, take this: your actions matter. Your choices matter. The decision to help or to walk away, it matters. And if you choose to help, if you choose to show up, you never know how far those ripples will spread." He looked down at Ranger, who was sitting calmly at his feet, tail wagging slowly. "This dog taught me that. He showed me what loyalty looks like, what service means, what it means to be there for someone without expecting anything in return. He's the best partner I've ever had, and he's the reason Sarah is here today." The applause was deafening. People stood, some crying, others smiling, all of them moved by the story of rescue and redemption. After the event, Sarah found David in the lobby. "Thank you for speaking, for being here, for everything. Thank you for inviting me, and for creating something beautiful out of something terrible." Sarah smiled. "That's what survivors do. We take the broken pieces and make mosaics." They stood together for a moment, two people connected by trauma and rescue, by the randomness of a storm and the intention of showing up. "How's Emma?" Sarah asked. "I remember you mentioned your daughter." "She's great, 13 now, starting to test boundaries and drive me crazy in the best way. I'm seeing her this weekend. We're taking Ranger to the beach." "That's wonderful. You're building a life." "Yeah, a different life than I planned, but a good one." Sarah's expression grew serious. "David, I need to tell you something. Richard Voss was convicted last month. All counts. He's going away for the rest of his life." David felt something release in his chest, tension he'd been carrying without realizing it. "Good. The trial was hard. I had to testify, to relive everything. But I did it, and I survived it because you showed me I was strong enough." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "You gave me back my life. I want you to know that. You gave yourself back your life. I just gave you a chance. That's all anyone needs sometimes, just a chance." 3 years after the hurricane, David sat in a coffee shop in Reston, Virginia, reviewing case files for an UPC. Oming operation. Ranger lay under the table, gray around the muzzle now but still sharp, still ready to work. His phone buzzed. Emma texting, "Dad, can Ranger come to career day at school? Everyone wants to meet him." David smiled and typed back, "Of course, when?" "Next Tuesday, you should come too, talk about your job." "I'll be there." This was his life now, case files and coffee shops, weekends with his daughter, the ordinary rhythm of being present. It wasn't always exciting. Some days it was tedious paperwork and long surveillance shifts, but it was meaningful and it allowed him to be the father Emma deserved. Tors appeared at his table, carrying her own coffee. "Mind if I sit?" "Go ahead." She settled across from him, glancing at the case files. "Baltimore operation." "Yeah, we're moving in Thursday, expecting to recover at least 10 victims. "Good." Tors was quiet for a moment then. "I wanted to tell you something. You remember Richard Voss?" David's jaw tightened, hard to forget. "He died in prison last week, stabbed by another inmate. Turns out even criminals have a code about people who hurt women." David didn't know how to feel about that. Relief, justice, sadness that it had come to violence. How's Sarah taking it? "I called her yesterday. She said it felt like closing a chapter, not necessarily the ending she wanted, but an ending nonetheless." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that justice was complicated, that closure was never clean, that trauma didn't have a tidy resolution. "You know what I've learned doing this work," Tors said finally. "It's not about the big wins. It's about showing up every day, doing the work, helping one person at a time. You're good at that, David. Better than most of the agents I've worked with." "I had a good teacher." David gestured to Ranger. Tors smiled. "He is pretty wise." The Baltimore operation went smoothly. They arrested 6 traffickers and recovered 12 victims, women and girls from Central America who'd been promised jobs and instead found themselves trapped in forced labor and sexual exploitation. David worked with the victims while other agents processed the scene. He knelt beside a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, Ranger at his side, and spoke in Spanish. "You're safe now, we're going to help you, do you understand?" The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Mi mama." "We'll find your mother, we'll reunite you, I promise." Ranger pressed against the girl's leg, offering comfort, and she wrapped her arms around the dog, sobbing into his fur. David waited patiently, giving her time to process, to release the trauma, to begin the long journey toward healing. This was the work, not the dramatic rescues or the high-speed chases, but the quiet moments of showing up, of being present, of helping someone take the first step toward recovery. Over the next few months, David watched as those 12 victims were connected with services, legal advocacy, trauma therapy, safe housing. Some were reunited with families. Others started new lives with new identities, protected from the people who'd tried to exploit them. And one of them, the 16-year-old girl who'd cried into Ranger's fur, sent David a letter 6 months later. It was written in careful English, probably with help from a translator. "Dear Agent Chen **. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for your dog who made me feel safe. I am living with a foster family now and going to school. I am learning English and making friends. Sometimes I have nightmares about the bad men, but I am getting help from a counselor. I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who are scared and hurt. You showed me that there are good people in the world, people who don't give up on others. Thank you for not giving up on me. Maria." David kept that letter in his desk drawer and read it on days when the work felt overwhelming, when the cases seemed endless, when he wondered if he was making any difference at all. He was making a difference, one person at a time. On Emma's 15th birthday, David threw her a party at his apartment. Her friends came, along with Jennifer and her now husband Mark, and to David's surprise, Sarah Mitchell showed up with a gift. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "Emma invited me. We've been emailing. She reached out a few months ago, wanted to know more about Ranger's Hope and the work we do. I think she might be interested in social work when she's older." David looked at his daughter, who was laughing with her friends, and felt pride swell in his chest. She was growing into someone compassionate, someone who wanted to help others, someone who understood that the world needed people who showed up. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Emma was opening presents, she held up an envelope from Sarah. Inside was a certificate. Emma Chen had B.N. named a junior ambassador for Rangers Hope, with the opportunity to volunteer and learn about victim advocacy. "This is so cool," Emma's face was glowing. "Dad, can I do this? Can I volunteer with them?" David looked at Sarah, who was smiling. "It's a legitimate program. We have several teen ambassadors who help with fundraising, awareness campaigns, administrative work. It's all supervised and age-appropriate." "Please, Dad." David thought about the path he'd walked, from soldier to rescuer to advocate. He thought about how one random act of showing up in a storm had changed multiple lives, had created ripples that were still spreading 3 years later. And now, his daughter wanted to be part of those ripples. "Yes," he said, "yes, you can do this." Emma hugged him, fierce and joyful, and David held her close, thinking about how different things could have been. If he'd evacuated during the hurricane, if he'd ignored the voice calling for help, if he'd chosen the easy path instead of the right one. But he hadn't, and because he hadn't, Sarah was alive. Rangers' Hope existed. Dozens of victims had been helped. The FBI's trafficking task force had saved hundreds of people, and his daughter was learning that she had the power to make a difference. 5 years after the hurricane, David stood on a beach in Destin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ranger lay beside him, old now and retired from active duty, but still David's constant companion. They were at the same beach where David's house had stood, rebuilt after the hurricane, now used as a vacation rental that helped fund Rangers' Hope. Sarah had bought it with money from donations and grants, transforming it into a retreat for trafficking survivors, a place where they could heal in peace. Emma was there too, now 18, and preparing to start college with a major in social work. She walked along the waterline with some of the current retreat residents, talking and laughing, offering the kind of understanding that only comes from growing up around people who have survived trauma. Jennifer and Mark stood near the house, setting up a barbecue. They'd become friends with Sarah over the years, all of them connected by that one night in the storm. Torres was there, along with several other agents from the task force. They came every year for this gathering, an informal reunion, a celebration of the work they did, a reminder that justice and healing were possible. And Sarah was there, thriving now, running a successful nonprofit that had helped more than 300 victims in 5 years. She'd become a national advocate, testified before Congress, changed laws about victim protection and support. She joined David on the beach, Ranger's tail wagging in greeting. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Sarah said. "Yeah, feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. You know what the best part is? Not just that you saved me, but that you showed me it was possible to save others. You gave me a roadmap for how to turn trauma into purpose." Sarah looked at the people gathered on the beach, survivors, advocates, law enforcement, all connected by shared mission. "Look at what we've built, all because you and Ranger showed up in a storm." David watched Emma playing with Ranger in the surf, both of them happy and free. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. The decision to stay during the hurricane, the decision to help a stranger, the decision to leave the Navy and build a different life. "I think about that night a lot," David said. "How random it was, how easily things could have gone differently. If the storm had hit 6 hours earlier or later, if you'd been in a different part of the woods, if Ranger hadn't heard you calling. But he did, and you did, and that's what matters." Sarah smiled. "You taught me that we don't get to control the randomness of life, the storms, the violence, the trauma, but we do get to control how we respond. We get to choose whether we show up or walk away, and you chose to show up. So did you. After everything you went through, you chose to help others instead of hiding. Because you showed me it was possible." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean you don't need help. It means you accept help when it's offered, and then you offer it to others when they need it." Ranger barked, drawing their attention. Emma had thrown a tennis ball, and the old dog was retrieving it with enthusiasm that belied his age. Some things never changed: Ranger's love of work, his joy in serving, his unwavering loyalty. "How long does he have?" Sarah asked gently. "Vet says maybe a year. His hips are going and his heart's getting weak, but he's still happy, still wants to work. I'll let him keep going as long as he's enjoying life." And after... David's throat tightened. He couldn't imagine Liff. Without Ranger, couldn't picture waking up without his partner beside him. "After, I'll grieve, and then I'll probably get another dog who needs a second chance. Keep the cycle going." "That's beautiful." They stood in silence, watching the sunset, feeling the warm breeze off the Gulf. The same beach where Sarah had almost died was now a place of healing, of hope, of second chances. "David," Sarah's voice was quiet, "I never asked you this, but I need to know, do you regret it? Staying in the storm, saving me, changing your whole life?" David thought about the question seriously. He thought about what he'd lost: his Navy career, some of the brotherhood he'd built over 15 years, the adrenaline of combat operations. He thought about what he'd gained: time with Emma, meaningful work, the knowledge that he was making a tangible difference in people's lives. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. That night in the storm, it wasn't just about saving you, it was about saving myself. I was lost, going through the motions, not really living. And finding you, helping you, watching you transform your trauma into something beautiful, it reminded me why I became a SEAL in the first place. Not for the glory or the adrenaline, but to protect people who needed protecting." He looked at Sarah. "You gave me purpose back. You showed me that the mission doesn't end when you leave the battlefield, it just changes form. So no, I don't regret a single decision I made that night." Sarah hugged him, and David hugged her back. Two people bonded by trauma and rescue and the long road of healing. Emma called them back to the house for dinner, and the gathering moved inside. They ate and talked and laughed, sharing stories of victories and challenges, of victims helped and predators stopped. It was a community built on shared purpose, on the understanding that they were all part of something larger than themselves. After dinner, David found himself alone on the porch with Ranger. The dog was tired, his breathing labored, but his tail wagged when David scratched behind his ears. "You're the real hero, you know that?" David said softly. "None of this happens without you. Sarah doesn't survive, Ranger's hope doesn't exist, those 300 victims don't get help. It's all because you heard someone calling for help and refused to ignore it." Ranger looked up at David with those intelligent brown eyes, and David could swear the dog understood every word. "Thank you," David whispered, "for being my partner, my friend, my compass when I was lost. Thank you for showing me what it means to serve with loyalty and love and courage. You've taught me more than any human ever could." Ranger licked David's hand, a simple gesture of affection and understanding. They sat together in the darkness, man and dog, partners for life, watching the stars emerge over the Gulf. The same Gulf that had spawned the hurricane 5 years ago, the same beach where everything had changed. David thought about Agent Taurus' words from years ago. It's not about the big wins. It's about showing up every day, doing the work, helping one person at a time. That was the legacy he wanted to leave. Not glory or recognition or headlines, but a quiet legacy of showing up. Of being the person who didn't walk away. Of teaching his daughter, and anyone else who was watching, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to help anyway. Emma joined him on the porch, sitting on the other side of Ranger. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think I'm going to be good at this, at helping people?" David looked at his daughter, brilliant, compassionate, determined to make a difference. "I think you're going to be incredible. You've got something I didn't have at your age. The understanding that it's okay to ask for help, that strength comes from community, that healing is a process, not a destination. You're going to help so many people, Emma. I want to be like you and Ranger. I want to be someone who shows up. Then you will be. Just remember, you don't have to save everyone. You just have to help one person at a time and trust that your actions will create ripples you can't see. Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, and Ranger's tail thumped against the porch, and David felt a peace he'd been chasing his entire life finally settle over him. This was enough. This moment, this community, this mission, it was more than enough. It was everything. 1 year later, David stood at the podium during a ceremony at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Beside him, in a custom display case, was Ranger's collar and badges. The old dog had passed peacefully in his sleep 3 months earlier, leaving a hole in David's heart that would never fully heal. But Ranger's legacy lived on. The FBI was establishing a new K-9 unit specifically focused on victim recovery and trafficking operations, and they were ing it the Ranger program. Military working dogs who retired from service would be retrained for domestic rescue work, partnered with agents like David who understood both combat operations and victim trauma. David spoke about Ranger with tears in his eyes, describing the dog's courage, intelligence, and unwavering dedication. He talked about the night in the storm, about finding Sarah, about how one dog's instinct to help had created ripples that were still spreading. Ranger taught me that heroism isn't about being fearless, David concluded. It's about being afraid and showing up anyway. It's about using your skills and training to help others, even when it costs you something. And it's about creating a legacy not of glory, but of service. He looked out at the audience. FBI agents, military personnel, victim advocates, and survivors including Sarah and Maria, the girl he'd rescued in Baltimore who was now studying to be a social worker. We're all here because we believe in showing up. Because we understand that every person matters, that every life is worth fighting for, that we have an obligation to help those who can't help themselves. Ranger understood that instinctively. He never questioned whether someone was worth saving, he just saved them. David's voice grew stronger. So let's honor his memory by continuing that work, by showing up every day, by being the person who doesn't walk away, by creating ripples of compassion that spread far beyond what we can see. The audience stood, applauding, and David stepped back from the podium, looking at Ranger's collar in its display case. His partner was gone, but the mission continued. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. The certainty that the work would continue, that others would carry the torch, that showing up mattered. Always,